Hey everybody, I am Susan Tuttle and I am joining you today for Wednesday Excerpts with Tony. And I am going to be reading from my book, uh, Out of the Blue. And I don't have an actual copy here even yet because it is a brand new book that's coming out on May 10th. You can pre-order it now, and I thought it would be fun to just read a small excerpt of what's coming about the story of Gwen and Nate. They start a little bit at odds with one another. Gwen is expecting to sell the camp that her and her grandfather have run. She has her own personal reasons why she wants to sell it. She's kind of coming from a place of hurt and woundedness. And Nate is unexpectedly showing up on her doorstep. So we're going to start there where Gwen was under the impression that they were meeting the people buying the camp today, and that's not what's happening. So she's in the middle of a conversation with her grandfather here where he's kind of just changing things on her a little. And in her mind, like it's a hairpin turn. Everything is changing. She says, Granddad just pulled out a journal and said, next to your mama and you, this place meant the world to your grandmother. Gwen says, I remember. And Granddad replies, I promised her it would continue. His watery eyes nearly undid her. Covering his hand with hers, Gwen stilled the trace of his ink. You did for as long as possible. Grandma would understand. She watched his struggling, her guilt niggling. She was capable of running this place and had the know-how and the ability. She simply didn't have the want any longer. Oh, she possessed a whole host of other emotions, fear, anger, even bitterness, but absolutely no desire to work with teens. She'd barely survived living in the background here these past 4 years. If things were different, Granddad, you know I'd do it. After Grandma died, she and Danny had planned on coming back, but then Danny was gone. I can't. Her throat tightened. I understand, sweetheart, I do. This time he squeezed her hand, but Camp Hideaway has life left in her. I'm not closing our camp or selling off our land. I hope you'll eventually understand. See? Hairpin turn, no warning. She attempted a roadblock. But if you don't sell, we won't have the money to build our new house or the yoga studio. Those things would provide for them when he retired. She'd already started working on her logo and website and certification. All that remained was her building, but money was tight. Had been since she'd returned. Granddad refused to increase camp prices, and the area needed several improvements. To help complete a few of them, she'd invested Danny's life insurance. The income from the sale would reimburse that money and take care of them until Gwen's studio found its footing. We're on schedule to break ground next week. He'd already detoured her roadblock. Lou can still break ground. His saggy cheeks pulled into an old familiar smile. Not in the house, but I made sure you can have your studio. Did he have a hidden bank account? How if we're not selling? Well, I found a renter for the summer. And with what he's paying, there'll be enough to cover payments on the construction loan for your studio and support it until it's running. Nerves humming, she barely dared to ask, you're renting? To whom? Their plan included building on the few small acres they weren't selling, land along Hidden Lake and adjacent to this camp. Whoever moved in would be their neighbor, and she already had the perfect ones picked out. Quiet and predictable Crossroads Church. They'd use the space for retreats and a few family camps, but no teens with sharp edges and a rougher attitude. Kids she'd once thought she could help, but now painfully knew different. A knock at his granddad's door snagged both their attention. White and green checkered curtains, the same green that matched the large pines outside, obscured the view through the half window. Granddad lumbered over, running a hand over his downy gray hair in what remained a losing battle to settle his cowlick in place. Something told her she was about to embark on her own battle with whomever stood behind that door. Granddad spared her a glance. Be nice, he said as he opened it. She pasted on a smile. Sunlight streamed in behind the stranger standing there, and all Gwen could make out was his tall form, well over 6 feet. Granddad offered his hand. Good to see you again, Nate. You too, Arthur. He ducked inside. His sheer size should distract her. Muscles strained against the short sleeves of his gray t-shirt, and his broad shoulders tapered to a thin waist. Warm blue eyes settled on her like he was already an old friend, and his full smile could be contagious. Something flickered in her. Awareness? It wasn't the time or place for her heart to stage its comeback. She shut it down and focused on Granddad's use of the word again. This must be who he'd rented to. She stood and looked to Granddad, who nodded toward the man. Gwen, this is Nate Reynolds. A pause. And Nate, meet my granddaughter, Gwen Dornboss. I've heard a lot about you, Gwen. Nate held out his hand. She stiffly shook it. Wish I could say the same. He cut a glance to Granddad. You haven't told her about me? I was getting there. Nate's teeth tapping together punctuated the awkward silence. Should I come back later? Now's fine, Granddad waved him off. Nate studied them. Are you sure? Not entirely. She'd rather replace him with someone from Crossroads Church, but I believe I have no choice. You always have a choice. Nate held her stare, unblinking, especially when it comes to attitude. I know, which is why I'm controlling mine. Lucky me. He tugged his hand through his thick brown hair, pulling its soft waves straight before releasing them into a mess on his head. Granddad motioned toward the table. How about we sit down? No, she'd already given up enough ground today. This time she refused to be the first to move. With a tiny, one-side-edged-up smirk that blew his friendly grin out of the water, Nate took 2 long steps to the table and held out a chair. Ladies first. Granddad's throat clearing halted her hesitation. She begrudgingly slid into her seat. Nate bent close as he pushed her in, his breath tickling the nape of her neck. Pleasure to finally meet you, Glenn. So there you have it. That's the start of where these two meet, and the story tells about where they end up. And there is some softening on Gwen's side along the way, but you understand kind of as the more you read how she ended up to be where she's at now as Nate meets her for the first time. So again, you can catch the story out of the blue, really anywhere books are sold. You can pre-order it, and it'll be releasing on May 10th. So thanks for having me today. You guys have a great one.